Today we're going to continue with our topic, Leadership for All Generations. Today the content is, in a healthy family, one finds all generations. Last week we spoke about the fact that there's never been a time in history where we have so many differences within one culture, within our German nation. We have such a difference in the rapid development of the society as it moves forward. And so this is a huge challenge for us as a Christian church as well. As a Christian church, we hold to the value of being a family. In Ephesians 2:18 verse 19 it says, "Because of what Christ has done for us, all of us, whether we are Jews or not, we can now come to the Father in one spirit. Therefore you are no longer strangers and without citizenships, but you belong to the believers, to God's family." That means, regardless of what age you are, you belong to the family. It means as well that when we are leaders, we are leading all generations, not just one generation. That's biblically correct. We are God's family. But the problem is that in this situation we have an urgent need. I've seen a lot of churches where we have churches for young people or mainly old people, and we hardly have churches that are in the position to have all generations and to meet their needs. And that is a real concern for me. I think the problem is that as churches, we're not forced to move in this area. If you have a company, then you know the urgency of having results. You're working with money. If you don't have profits, at some point you'll go bankrupt. But we, in our church bubble, as it were, it's nice that we can have church meetings, that we can organize events for us, but we don't have this urgency that we actually need to feel for the generations. And that's what this is about. The company always has to be innovative, but we don't have to. But actually, this question is just as important for us as for everybody else who leads something. The gap between us, between those that have authority or leadership, often the older generation, this gap is getting bigger and bigger to our youth. And that's why we have a problem. And this problem needs to be addressed. It's not easy, but it's urgent and it has to be addressed. Our job is not just to pass a baton on to the next generation, but more than that, to already have a biblical church of all generations, to build this. And that means all generations integrated into one body, in one function, giving results from generation to generation. I was brought up I had contact with a church. It was a traditional church, and at some point it was that I got saved, and I went to a church where it was very alive. And in this church, I looked around how things were functioning, and I could quite easily have given 2 or 3 or 4 ideas of how things could be done differently and better. And at some point in time, the church leader had the idea to ask me, or he wanted to ask us, if we would come into the core team, to work in the core team. But at that point in time, the problem was I was only 25 years old. I was a youth leader. I was married at that point. I was already my studies were behind me. I had 2 children. I was a leader and a manager in my work. But at church, when the question was put to the rest, the answer came, no, he is too young. And that really did hurt me and consumed me at that point in time. I was so busy at work, so I just ticked that one off. Many years later, I was in a larger church, and I really just sensed an urgency to plant a church. And I spoke to our leader back then, and I was very concerned about it because I was only 30 years old. But I really sensed that calling to start a church. And that church leader had insight that God calls young people to service. And he said to me, well, I'll never forget these words. He said, well, I'm surprised, but I sense that God has spoken to you. And my wife and I then planted a church, and I was 31 years old. And the great thing was that the church leader didn't look at my age, but he looked at whether we qualified for this or not. And I think that if we really want to be family in the whole church, then we have that authority then to make sure that all generations are included. What do you think about the younger generations, Generation Y? We need to take them with us. Otherwise, we will have gaps in our church. And these gaps are a huge problem. But we need to make sure, as the leaders, we are often the problems. Paul said, I'm willing to do anything so that I may reach some. And I think that we have the authority. We should be prepared to do everything that we can reach some. And so, a question for you at the end. My question to you, are you convinced about the church as a family? Be really honest. Ask yourself this question. And secondly, are you willing to do anything so that the church represents all generations? Now is the time. No, maybe, maybe not. No ifs or buts. No excuses. It's His church. It's your church as well, and you can do things differently if you have a heart for this. If you have comments about this today, to this hot topic, I would love to hear from you. So please write to us, write a comment or ask a question, and we would like to answer these questions.